In the previous video, we drew the big picture of our workflow automation process on the digital canvas. Now it's time to define each action of the process, and in this video, we'll focus on the first action, Get File Data. By doing this, you will learn how to create data models using the Data Model Designer component and work with variables. We assume that the audience has a basic understanding of the data model and variable concepts in general. Let's see how it works. Our demo business case is to automate the notification flow for the issued invoices. To do this, first we need the source of data. For simplicity, we decided that the data was in an Excel file. It could also be another application or a database in real life, but it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. When we select the Get File Data object that we dragged on the workspace, a new window opens on the right side. Here we see that our action is not configured yet. We click on Mapping Configuration, and in the next window, we see that to configure that, we need to provide information about the file to process and a location to store the data using variables. So we need to define two variables. We close this window and then click on the Process Variables button at the top right corner of the workspace, the one marked with an X between brackets. It is called Process Variables because the variables defined here are available only within this process. Click on Add Variable to define the first one for File to Process. We add a name, Invoice File, then select the type, which in this case is File. Because we need to provide the file, we set it as an input variable. We click on Create Variable, and here it is. We have a type file, input variable called Invoice File. Now it's time to create the second variable, but because every file or data source in general has a specific structure, we cannot select a standard variable type like string of file as we did with the first one. We need to define the type of that variable first, and we do that with the Data Model Designer. But before we do that, we open the Get File Data action configuration window again and add in the File to Process field, the Invoice File variable we just created. Now let's create a data model to use as a type for the second variable we need. We save the process and hit back to the Processes page. Clicking on the Data Model Designer button on the left side menu takes us to the Data Models main page. Here we can create, modify, and delete data models that we use in our processes. First step, we click on Create Data Model and name our new model. We call it Alerts Due Invoices Data Model. Click Create. Second step, we add attributes to it. Attributes define the structure of our data models. In this case, we will keep the same structure as the Excel table we use. We made the Excel file available for download, so you can use the same if you want. We use the Excel column names for our attributes, but we could give any name. The first attribute, name, type string. Before clicking on Create, we check the Add Another box, as we do not want to close and open this window every time. The second attribute is invoice number, also type string. Then due date, type date. Amount, type double. Phone number, type string. And last, email address, type string. That's it, our first data model. We go back to our process. Click on Process Variable. Add Variable. In the Name field, we write Invoice List, and in the Type field, we select the data model that we've just created. Alerts Due Invoices Data Model. We also need to inform the platform that this variable will contain a list of values, so we check the List button. Hit Create Variable, and that's it. We have the second variable required to get the data from a file using the Get File Data action. Now we need to add it into the Mapping Configuration window. In the Store Data As field, we click Add Variable, and from the drop-down list, we select Invoice List. To finish the configuration, we need to map each column from the file to our data model attributes. We click the Add Column button 6 times, as we know we have 6 columns in the Excel file. On the left side, we add the names of the Excel's columns, and on the right side, we map the correspondent attribute from our invoice list variable. Name column mapped to invoice list name, invoice number to invoice number, and so on. After we mapped the last column, we closed the mapping configuration window and we successfully finished the getFileData action setup. To summarize, we have declared two variables, invoice file and invoice list. The first one is a type file variable that will store the file to process. The second one will store the values within the file, and to be able to do that, we created the alerts due invoices data model. We are ready now to set up for the ForEach and the Decisional actions.